This is the Partner for Leads Biz podcast for small business owners and entrepreneurs. It's a podcast for those of you who want to build your business in a smarter, relationships-first way. Welcome to episode 10. I am your host, Roberto Hernandez. The intro music you're hearing was composed and performed by my friend and former bandmate, Frank Salazar. You'll hear it again at the end of this episode. This is only the second episode for which I've used the track, and I'm still super excited about it. I might even just play the whole thing at the end of an episode soon. He gave me multiple versions, too. The guy's so talented. Super cool, too. So is my guest for this episode, Jason Resnick. Jason is a freelance web designer developer who specializes in the WordPress platform. He's figured out how to create a sustainable freelance business, and he is helping other freelancers do the same in a new arm or new chapter of his business. His secret and big advice? Specialize. Niche down. Figuring that out for his own business, though, didn't come to him right away. In this conversation, Jason shares insight into his journey, which included a job, freelancing, back to a job, back to freelancing, up to where he is today. He's host of two podcasts, the seasonal podcast, Live in the Feast, in which he hones in on specific topics each season, niching down again, and his daily podcast, a bit more raw. It's called Ask Rezzz. On this one, he fields freelancer questions. His story's really great, his business is cool, and I love WordPress, so I really enjoyed speaking with him about his business. I learned a lot about business and got some life lessons, too. So I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Here's me and Jason Resnick. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, and I really appreciate your time. You're in New York today, yes?
Yes, I am.
And that is home. Is that where you were born?
Yes, I was born on Long Island. I lived in the city for, I'd say, maybe about 10-ish years, and just recently we moved back to Long Island because there's backyards here, and when you have a 1-year-old, you kind of need one.
Yeah, a 1-year-old man, Superman with a business and a dad and a wife and everything.
I don't know about Superman, but I'm trying.
Hey, I don't have kids. My wife and I don't have kids, and I'm just always amazed at all, these people that you and I both know that do it with one or more child in their lives as well. It's pretty amazing and inspiring. When did, so growing up in New York, when you first found yourself to be a working lad, were you doing kind of a business thing on your own, or did you find yourself freelancing back then? How did the business world start for you?
Yeah, so I always kind of knew that sitting at somebody else's desk was not really for me. Not to go down this deep rabbit hole of my life, so to speak, but even in college, and I went to college in the late 90s, and I had an argument with my mom. It was like junior year, where I said to her that I was going to drop out and go out west, where Silicon Valley was, and San Jose, and all the stuff was happening out there. She was like, nope, you're going to stay here. You're going to get your degree and go that way and all that. And obviously she won that argument. But I was a developer. That's what I enjoyed doing. And I went that traditional route for a while. I worked at a Fortune 50 company, doing dev work, Java development, all sorts of cross-browser testing, garbage, and all that stuff. But I always had freelancing on the side. It was a skill set that, at least at that time, in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was a skill that many businesses wanted, but they couldn't really afford. So they looked to freelancers. And for me, that was a natural transition to say, hey, look, I have a skill set. I could do the side hustle thing, and maybe this is viable for me as a business moving forward. Because for me, I always wanted the time freedom that owning my own business allowed me to have. I just never really knew what that path looked like to get there. I always wanted to be able to have the time to take off on a random Tuesday because it was nice, and spend time with friends and family and travel and do these things that I want to do, and not have to ask somebody for permission if I could actually take off the day. So that's where all of that sort of thing came from. So I always had that freelancing alongside the full-time work. And the first time I had an opportunity to do full-time freelancing was basically when all the dot-coms imploded on themselves in the early 2000s. The company I was working for at the time put all their eggs in the startup basket, and they basically pared back big time. So I was laid off, and a year and a half into doing my own thing, I wound up having to go get a job because I knew nothing about sales. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about actually running the business. My skill set was fine. It was just all of the other things.
Sure.
So, and I had to pay bills.
That was a booming time too at first. And what did you study in college?
I started with computer science,
okay.
And then I moved to information management only because I felt that if computer science didn't work out, I at least wanted some business background. So
sure.
It was basically less physics and more economics.
And then, okay, so you start your business, you struggle, you go get a job again, and then when did you restart your business and find yourself where you are today?
Yeah, in 2010. And that was basically, I went back with the idea that I'm not going back permanently. I want to learn about contracts. I want to learn about marketing. I want to learn about sales, relationships, fulfillment, all of the other things that I didn't know about business beforehand. And 2010, in August of 2010, was when the last time I sat at somebody else's desk.
Cool. Did you feel that you learned an ample amount of those different areas by the time you got to 2010?
An ample amount, that's probably an accurate term.
Just enough?
Yeah, just enough, because it was about 2.5 years in where I started feeling the stresses. I was getting burnt out, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, because I feel really stretched thin to the point where I didn't know what was going on. Like, I was doubting myself. I was doubting my skills. I was like, maybe this thing isn't for me. This whole nine yards about basically, imposter syndrome times 10, right? And it was, ironically enough, it was right a month after I had asked my then girlfriend to marry me. I said to her that I was going to go back and get a full-time job because I don't think this is for me. And, I felt that I couldn't put her, like, it was okay for me to go through the roller coaster of freelancing and all that stuff, but there was no way that I was going to put her through that. And I was just like, this is the way it is. And she looked at me and she said, but that's not what you want to do. And I know that that's not what you want for our life. We'll just figure it out. And I was like, what? I was like, this person that I'm about to marry just told me not to go get a job, right? Like, so it was kind of like the big kick in the butt that I needed, because she's the rock in the relationship. I'm the gambler. I'm the risk taker. She's the one that, is conservative, making sure that, all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed on everything. And I'm more of the, hey, let's go try this, or let's go do this, or, I have this idea. And for her to say that to me that was the game changer. And that's when I realized that what I was doing, I was being a generalist freelancer. And I didn't know it at the time, but I basically analyzed my business at great depth from both the professional side, but also my own personal view on what I was doing. And I specialized my business. I niched down. And since then, that was what I needed. And that's why I talk a lot about figuring out what that specialty is for you and your business, because that's where you're really going to grow and grow sustainability, grow profitability in your business, and be stable.
I was going to ask you what changed, but you volunteered it, which is great. And, I probably don't argue it enough, but having a great partner in your life makes all the difference. So good for you. And so speaking of niching down, I had jotted down, I'll tell you what I said about you in an episode that came out today, the day we're recording this one, on the Partner for Leads Biz podcast. It was one that I did myself, and it was on mastermind groups and, why people should should consider being in one and how to start one in general. And so I gave a little, some coming guests on the podcast, and you were included in that. And I said a freelance web, something like a freelance web designer who helps freelance web designers be better freelance web designers. And of course, I was being a little silly, but you're in your own words, I believe, helping freelancers specialize their freelancing business by building recurring revenue to their lives versus what I said. But anyway, that sounds great. Does that define the niche?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that came later, for sure, helping other freelancers. But my services is helping established online businesses increase revenue by shortening the time to first sale and increasing lifetime value of the customer. And that's in a nutshell, that's what I tell people I do from the services side. But what I do with the freelancers is help them figure that nutshell out for themselves, because that came later through conversations that I had at events and meetups and conferences and things like that, where people were like, hey, you live in New York and you've been doing freelancing for so long. Like, what's your trick? What's your secret? Like, New York's not really cheap to live in. Mm-hmm. And, I want to know what you know, right? And just having these conversations. And I love helping people. I love having conversations. I love going on podcasts and sharing stories and having great conversations. And just, I was like, hey, I could probably formalize this in a better framework and a better way to help people achieve what I did. And I basically just reverse engineered. I went back to all my old notebooks and what did I do on that day that was like the light bulb moment of figuring this thing out. And I'm not any smarter than anybody else or figured anything. I just kind of, hey, if this is what I did, and maybe if this problem you're at now sounds like what I went through, maybe this solution's for you, and maybe I can help you out in trying to figure this out for you. And that's what I focus in on every day now is helping other freelancers figure out what their niche is. I'm always going to be a developer. I'm always going to be a freelancer, and that's never going to change. So that's always the big part of my business. But a big part of my business now is helping other freelancers too.
That's cool. Going back to when you analyzed your business at great length, if you could describe the tools or the toolbox, the toolkit that you use to do that, how would you describe it?
I would describe it very manually. All it was basically just a pen and paper. And I asked myself several questions. And it was, who do I want to work with? What projects do I enjoy? Why do I enjoy them? And then the opposite of that, who do I not want to work with? What projects don't I enjoy? And why is that? And when I dissected all of that, it was the part that was really pivotal is trying to figure out the common elements of each of those things. Because what happens is when you distill all of that down into common reasons across the board of the things that you like and don't like, you start to see that pattern, right? So for me, at that time, I didn't want to build e-commerce sites from scratch, but I loved working on e-commerce sites, and I loved working in a certain type of e-commerce sector, and didn't like others. And I didn't realize that until I went through this exercise. And it was just more of it. I literally sat on the couch for about 4 to 6 hours every night for almost a week straight, just writing all this stuff down, just looking at things. And it was just really a lot of self-reflection. But out of that came that mindset that, hey, if you don't like these other things and you don't want to work with these other kind of people, not that they're bad people, it's just not what you want to do, why are you doing it? And just focus in on those things that you want to work on and who you want to work with, and just have conversations with them and try to get them as clients. And it became so much easier. Everything else was easier. The language that he used, even the conversations with, specific events and other things in talking with other people, everything else was so much easier. Once you define who it is that you serve and help, then all of the rest, it's a weird mindset shift that you have, but everything else is easier. You might be saying no to work, but on the long side of it is that saying no to other work gives you opportunities to work on the things that are actually good for you and your business.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. In the beginning, did you find yourself having to say no more frequently than you would say today, or maybe having to explain to people that you didn't do these particular types of work that you knew you could do, but you just didn't enjoy doing it, although you might, I'm assuming you wouldn't necessarily put it that way. Did you find yourself doing that more in the beginning and less today, or as time went on?
Maybe initially, because when you first start with this transition, and the word of mouth, obviously, in the freelancing game and web development is the biggest chunk of your incoming leads. And that comes from the people that you've worked with in the past. So if I was a generalist and I did, X, Y, and Z type websites, but I'm not doing those websites anymore, those clients and those past clients that I had are going to refer the work that I did for them, right? So I had to kind of start putting up a filter in place immediately so that I wasn't wasting time talking to the wrong people. And that came by way of a project brief, which is just an online form that they had to fill out before we even got onto a phone call. So it was more of a defense mechanism more than anything to say, hey, look, here's this link. I need you to fill this out, and then we could schedule a call if it looks like I can help you. And some people were, push back and be like, I just want to get on a call.
Yeah.
And that was a red flag for me. And I learned over time, if I get 2 red flags, it's not going to be a happy project for both of us. So if I got pushed back in that way, like, hey, I just want to jump on a call, well, there's a red flag. Like, we're not going to work together if you can't fill out a simple form that's only going to take about 5 to 7 minutes for you to fill out. And it's just when I started looking back at the things that I did, I didn't realize it then when I was doing it. I was kind of doing it for self-preservation because it's just me, and it's still just me now. But I was like, okay, I can't waste time on a 45-minute sales call with somebody if I know that they're never going to be a client of mine. There's just not enough time in the day to do that. So I need to put up something that filters that out and says no for me, right? So I don't have to have that awkward conversation, be like, your nephew said that you should put up an e-commerce store at the barbecue that you just had Sunday afternoon. I don't want to do that, right? Like, there's a lot of things there that for me was awkward because, I don't want to say no to business, especially if they're ready to pay either, right? Like, that was a hard thing to get over too. But knowing that I had that project brief there, and if they didn't meet a certain couple of questions on that project brief, that I could read and know that I could help them or not, and not just waste time on. I didn't want to waste their time. I didn't want to waste my time. And that project brief was that first stepping stone to putting those processes in place of my business to help me say no, because that's ultimately what you need to do. You do need to say no more than you say yes.
Yep. So jumping to the world where you serve other freelancers, do you work with a specific range of experience, or a pretty broad range of experience in terms of how experienced the freelancers are that you help?
Yeah, I help mostly freelancers that have been doing it for about 5 years or more. And that is just, I want to say that was tactful, but it was by accident. And I think it was just because of the language that I speak and knowing that, hey, if you're stuck in the grind, you wonder what went wrong, there's this business that you want to build, but now you feel like you're working 15 hours a day and not growing and hitting a ceiling. What happened? What went wrong? Because that's where I was twice, right? So when I share that story, that starts to resonate with people because hey, Jason went through the same thing that I'm going through right now. Maybe he has the answer. How did you break that ceiling? And, I talk a lot about it on my podcast and on other podcasts like yours, just, specializing. This is how I did it. And I walked through, and now I help people by way of either one-on-one coaching or a community called Feast that we work through all of that specializing. We work through figuring out how to build recurring revenue in your business so that you can get off of that hamster wheel, because that's really what you're on. You're on this hamster wheel of trying to get that next project. If you don't have recurring revenue in your business to help stabilize you and help kind of flatline those feast or famine cycles, then you're gonna struggle. You're gonna be hurting, and you stress out and burn out, and you're not gonna accomplish the goals that you wanted to when you first started your business. Because we didn't start business to work more. We started business for whatever other reasons. Like for me, it's the time freedom. For other people, it's they want to travel and be a digital nomad. Others, it's the unlimited potential of the income, right? Mm-hmm. So whatever that is for you, that's what your goal was. And I want to help you get there.
What's the most special part about that 5-year mark that sort of delineates the freelancers that you typically will work with versus those who haven't quite gotten there yet?
Yeah, I think what it is that, see, I feel there's two marks. There's one at 2 years, which I ran into twice. And then there's one at 5 years. Now, the 2 years is, hey, I built up some savings, and anybody can get work for a year, right? Whatever side hustle that you want to do. And then you say, there's that kind of false, I don't know what you want to call it, but there's basically this feeling that, hey, this is going to be a success because I've done it for a year. Now, once you've done it for a year, now you kind of have to maintain that. You have to grow. You have to think about things that you didn't think about when you first started. And when you start building that business and you start taking time away from the billable time to start building your business, now you're not getting as much revenue, right? Mm-hmm. And that second year that happens there is, I got to dip into savings a little bit. Right? And maybe a little bit more. And, I didn't put too much into my sales process this month, and now my leads are dried up. Now you kind of get stuck, right? And it's funny too, because I thought it was me when I went to the second time, and I'm like, maybe it's just me. I don't know. Like maybe this thing's not for me if I can't figure this out doing it a second time. So I started asking a lot of other experienced freelancers and finding out that they ran into that same 2-year period. And then it felt better. I mean, it didn't solve any problems, but it felt better knowing that this wasn't something that was in me. It was just, maybe this is the experience or the arc of a freelancer. Like if you want to do this long term, then you kind of have to look at it more long term. You can't look at the immediate as much as, as most freelancers do. So once you get past that 2-year mark, the next is that 5-year mark. Now you're more intermediate. You look at investing in yourself, through education, online programs, or events and marketing and these other kind of things over that period of time. And as a generalist, which most freelancers are, at least starting out anyways, is that 2 to 5 year mark is where you start doing that investment, you start seeing an ROI on some of these things that you're working on, and it grows to a point that there's this ceiling now, right? Like you can't raise your rates anymore. You can't dump any more ad money if that's where you're going. You can't go and speak at events any more than you already are, because you're now starting to suck time away from the business and you actually have to get this stuff done. You're hiring people, but you're hitting this revenue ceiling because your rates are basically stalled at that point. And that 5-year mark, I hear this story time and time again, is I want to grow, but I just can't keep adding people and adding clients. There's that, everything's a wash now. Like if I add another client and I hire another person, I'm not growing my revenue. So that's where you have to start looking at becoming an expert, the go-to person, right? In whatever it is that you do. Serving a kind of audience, being in a specific location, solving problems that are unique to a certain type of business or industry, whatever that thing is, you start to have to be known for that and providing value back into that space. And that's something that a lot of freelancers aren't accustomed to doing because they're used to using their skills as the actual driver, the engine of the business, versus leveraging sales and marketing in a way to figure out what the problem that you're actually solving for the client, and then what that value is to that client. That's where the money is, and that's where the niche or the specialization of your business happens. You're not just building a website anymore. You're not designing a logo anymore. You're solving their problems. And when you solve their problems, that's when they become raving fans of you. You'll start seeing more and more people come into your pipeline that are more like them, and you start to become that go-to person. For me, it was, hey, you're the WooCommerce guy, right? Okay, I guess so. But I was solving unique problems that people using WooCommerce wanted to be solved, and it was increasing their businesses. So that's kind of how I fell into that. And that 5-year mark is where it seems like a lot of people start hitting that realization that they're trying to break through that glass ceiling, and they're not really sure how to do that.
And it sounds like the niching down brings time and added revenue, but maybe more than anything, time back into their lives through a kind of, or for a few different reasons. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. It's very accurate. I mean, you're buying back, because the thing is, when you figure out what the value of your service to your clients are, you're not charging by the hour anymore. You're charging value-based, right? And if you can understand, let's say, how many hours a week they're saving in their business because you wrote a program to do the thing that was manually entered before, that increases their profits. Sure. If you're bringing in new revenue to their business, obviously you're changing their bottom line. So whatever that thing that you're solving for them is you need to find out what that value is to them, and then make your price a no-brainer against that. So it could be something that takes you 10 hours to do, but you charge $10,000 for it because you're the only person that can do it, or one of the very few that can do it. Well, if it brings your clients $100,000 in revenue or more, they're going to, of course, pay you $10,000 for it.
Sure.
Right? Because it's going to compound their business. So it makes it a no-brainer. And that's what I try to help freelancers shift their mindset into thinking.
So for people who might be listening to this that are, maybe they do some sort of freelancing, or they're hearing or sensing a lot of parallel in their own business that may not be a freelance model, but maybe more of a traditional business model, what would you say the biggest challenges have been for you in terms of balancing the two sides of your business? You maintain the freelance business, and now you have this growing but a personal brand type of business where you're specializing in helping other freelancers build their businesses?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out myself, but it's definitely a learning curve for me because it's, there's a lot of things. For one, I feel there's a lot of overlap, and that's just because, like, I'd much rather, and my wife's funny with this, is that she's like, I know when you come out of your office in the day, I know what you've been working on, and I can just tell because if I'm working on code or, trying to figure out somebody's, spaghetti code or whatever, there's usually banging on the desk or, grumbles or something of that nature. But when I'm talking with other freelancers and hearing their feedback in that, hey, that's helpful, or I didn't think about it like that, or when I can see when they have these light bulb moments, I mean, that's the fuel to my fire. And I love doing that. And coming out of my office after a day of that, I mean, there's no better high. So for me, to be able to juggle that stuff is like, okay, I will always be a developer because that's what I love and do. And also I don't ever want to lose touch with that, right? Sure. So if I'm helping other freelancers and I'm saying, hey, this is what works in today's market, I mean that's what works in today's market, not what worked 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? And I think there's a lot of that online that used to work, but it doesn't work in today's market. And being, there's a definite generational gap happening with a lot of 20-somethings coming into the market now, where I'm like, oh, you know what? There's a lot to learn from how they view the world versus how, my contemporaries view the world and how we view work and all that other stuff that, I'm learning myself. And just to be able to juggle that sort of point of view is hard. And to meet people where they are is hard too. And what I mean by that is, where are they in their journey and where are they congregating, right? Whether it's online or meetups or events or things like that, to try to help them out in a way, right? I've quote unquote grown up online in the WordPress space, where it's a very close knit group. Your name can travel pretty quickly in and around that group. And that was great for me for what I do for my services. But I came from Java, Ruby on Rails, custom PHP development world, which was vastly different than the WordPress space. Sure. So now I'm trying to figure out, okay, I made my name there. People recognize me there. How do I reach other people? Where do I go to there? And it's really just a learning curve for me to, go on Instagram, go in Facebook, go in these other places where these other pockets of people are congregating, and trying to just have conversations and realizing there are times where I'm like, holy cow, I've been doing this for 2.5 hours. I gotta get back to work or something like that. But, that's what, for me, that's the tough part, sure. Right? And try to juggle that and make, better business decisions on my time is something that, I don't know. Any suggestions you have? I'm all ears.
Well, I was just thinking to myself that the content you're creating online for freelancers, including the website and the podcasts, that has to be slowly beginning to show a little traction, or people coming at you for help. I don't know if this is exactly a suggestion, but another thing that was in my mind, I'm still, figuring this out or thinking about it a lot, but so you talked about the younger generation coming in. Have you looked at or thought about that, hey, maybe my age group is my crowd, or there's an age group that is really my crowd, and these young, as many of these younger people, maybe none of them are. Has that ever entered your mind, or have you seen that to be true at all?
Yeah, I mean, it has entered my mind. I do see it from just putting out the content, like you said, the podcasts. I have two different types of podcasts. One is more of a longer form podcast, and then the other one is a quick hit, right? It's like 5 minutes. I answer one question, and I do that daily. And it's funny, and I was just having a conversation with someone over the weekend about it when I was looking at my podcast analytics of where people listen to, right? So I can tell, like, if you're listening to it on the web, a certain podcatcher, these kind of things. And I have two podcasts that talk to the same types of people, but the analytics show very, very different. And as I was having this conversation with somebody, the age thing came up. Like, or it wasn't much the age thing, but as much as it was, hey, look, this person just, wanted the answer of this question, and this is the easiest way that they can get it delivered to them. So it's funny to unpack that a little bit more to try to figure out who specifically to target. But I feel that what I provide by way of content and the value that is there helps all age brackets, right? Like, and for somebody that says niche down as much as I do, for me to say that it covers that broad range, I know sounds a little bit ambiguous there, but I have coaching clients that are 20 somethings, and I have coaching clients that are 60, right? So it's really about where they're at in their freelancing journey that I'm concerned about more than anything else. So if I can meet them and help them accomplish things that they're hitting that I only hit a few steps back in my journey, and I can get them over the hill faster, that's where I want to meet them.
Sure. I'm thinking from my own life experiences, not that you won't ultimately find that there's an age group perhaps that excludes the youngest of the freelancers that is actually your target. But I would think that you, in the world that you deal in, that you would have, you will always capture some of the younger generation, just because people identify with people, and not always, granted, a lot of people really identify with people their own age, but people identify with others for different reasons. And you're doing all those great things online to make yourself identifiable with, you know what I mean? Because your face is out there, and you're you're on your podcast and all these things, and you're doing some video content, so it gives people an opportunity to figure out if they, if you resonate with them. You probably use that all the time, don't you?
I don't. I've toyed around with it, but yeah.
I like it. I just sort of accidentally said it. So a couple of questions. I'm veering left here, but does your wife, or has she worked in the business with you?
No. Okay. But what's funny is that we do tangential services. So she works in the PPC world, AdWords specifically, Bing ads and such. So she freelances as well. And there's been one or two handoff of clients, but we kind of have separate businesses.
That's cool. Both a couple of nerds. It's a nerd household.
Well, and what's funny is like when we first started dating, she looked at it more of a like, and I think she still somewhat does, but she looks at it more like a job, right? She tells me this all the time. She's like, you just never shut off. You're either listening to a podcast or, we were online in Disney World, and I asked her an SEM question, and she goes, are you serious right now? Like, I'm like, I don't know. My brain just doesn't shut off. If it pops into my head, I better do something about it at that point, right? But I definitely I don't feel that there is a work-life balance. I feel that it's your life, and work is a part of it. It's a tool that allows you to live the kind of life that you want, and that I'm a firm believer in that. And that's I never shut off once 5 o'clock rolls around or 4 o'clock or whenever I decide to close the laptop. It's just how it is, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, she's the caretaker. She's, like I said before, she's the rock. I mean, she takes care of our son all day long, you know, and she allows me to scale the business however best it works for us.
That's cool. Sounds like it's working well. And so your last name doesn't have a Z in it. Your website has not just a Z, but 3 Zs. And so the other left field question was, what's with the 3 Zs?
It's funny you asked that. So Rezz has always been a nickname of mine because my last name is Resnick, right? And, you know, growing up, sports, everything's Rezz. And so when I was playing video games... It's a great
sports name, by the way.
when I was playing video games in, you know, the 90s and whatever, when you started to have online games come out, you had to come up with a handle, right? So I would pick Rezz, right? And sometimes REZ was taken. So I did REZZ because I was too lazy to come up with anything else. And so it got to a point where I would have 3 Zs. And that was my name over and over again because I figured that was more like to have
availability, right?
Availability on than 1 or 2. And so when I came up with the website, I was in college at the time and I just wanted to buy a domain name. And now there was no business sense around it or anything like that. And so I was like, okay, well, you know, I could put animated GIFs on any name. Rezz.com sounds good, you know, and that's really where it came from. And it stuck because as I started growing in the business, that's where I put all my things. That's where my portfolio existed. That's where, you know, I directed people to. And in the business world, people are like, you have such a short 5-letter domain name. That's awesome. And I was just like, all right, I guess I'll stick with it. Because there were times where I was like, do I make jasonresnick.com or, you know, whatever else other name that I was toying around with at the time. And it just always stuck. I was just like, Rezz, that's it. Rezz with 3 Zs.
Yeah, I like it. I was curious. So let's talk about podcasting for a minute. I'm going to just start with a very broad question, but what have you learned from or about podcasting so far? You've been doing it for has it been 2 years?
Yeah, it's been longer. I actually was a part of a podcast, a WordPress development podcast. We ran about 20 episodes or such, but it was so irregular. It was just a bunch of geeks talking techno jargon. And that was kind of like how I got myself into the WordPress space. And some of the things that I learned about podcasting in general was, for one, I like that medium. I like this medium. I'd much rather pull up a microphone and have a conversation or even just speak for 5 or 10, 15, 20 minutes rather than write a blog post. But you could turn that into a podcast, a blog post. You could turn that into a video. You could turn that into audio clips, right? So it's easily repurposed. So that was one thing. The next thing that I learned more recently, and something that I am trying to learn more and more about, was it's a performance. It has to be entertaining. It has to resonate with the person that's listening to it, but because it's more of an intimate medium, right? We have our earbuds in, we may be driving in the car and it's the speaker in the car, or we're jogging or whatever it is. It's a one-on-one conversation that you're essentially having with somebody else. And that's it. It's you guys. And so it has to be interesting. It has to be compelling. And it has to, like, you hear about this radio voice, sing-songy type stuff. And, you know, it's been suggested that I do more of that, right? But mostly really just, instead of being more me, so to speak, I guess, you know, hey, have it sound ridiculous in your head, because by the time it gets to somebody's ear, it sounds normal. And so, you know, I'm like, okay, I guess I could try that. And, you know, I try it sometimes and I feel idiotic and stupid, but it does. It's a performance that it has to be compelling enough and resonate with the person that's listening to it, but it also has to be somewhat entertaining because they're going to listen to it for half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it may be. And yeah, for me, it's the medium for me. Those are the two things.
I've only listened to one of your early episodes, and I'm anxious to revisit it now that you're much farther in. But do you find yourself now? Are you saying that you find yourself now trying to use more of a podcaster voice as opposed to being as natural as you were in the beginning, or your normal voice as you were in the beginning?
Yeah, if you go, and it's definitely noticeable in the Ask Rezzz podcast. If you go to some of the earlier episodes, I've recorded, I think this week is 155 or 160 episodes. Mm-hmm. So, and it's every weekday. If you go to the early ones, like 30 or 20 even, you can definitely hear the difference between episode 150 and episode 20. And it's worlds apart. There's music, there's, more of a, hey, feasters, welcome to episode blah, 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 right? And it's just, you have to hook people in a little bit more. And even though it's a 5-minute episode or a 7-minute episode, it's those first initial seconds that people are going to listen to most. And if you don't grab their attention right away, you're going to lose that listener. And I've seen the analytics. The analytics don't lie, really. Podcast analytics in and of themselves are a little fuzzy, but just to see the subscriber growth when I started making some of those performance changes has helped, right?
Interesting.
So,
what's your number one performance tip for a podcaster?
I would say if it definitely have some fluctuation in your voice. Because for me, it's hard for me to do that. I have introverted tendencies. Not that I'm not confident in what I say, but the person that's listening to you, if you're monotone, sometimes it doesn't come off as confident. And to have the ups and downs and pauses in your voice, especially in a talking head episode like Ask Rezzz or a talking head podcast like Ask Rezzz, that adds that level of confidence to the listener that, hey, this person has value here, right? They know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. So if you're just kind of like shy or withdrawn a little bit and you're kind of very monotone and there's no breaks in what you're saying, then it kind of looks like maybe either you're reading it or you're not as confident in what you say as you should be.
Sure. It's kind of funny. In ways I've gone a little the opposite direction in that I had an editor for a long time and he made me sound just, taking certain vocal tics, things that I do, ums and all the so's that I throw in, taking those things out and making me sound really, really experienced in a way. And once I got the question asking and let people talk and the interviewing part of it down, that worked pretty well. But I always longed for it to be more, a little more conversational and a little more raw, I guess. So that the mistakes I make are there, unless they're just too bad to leave on there. But the other thing that's kind of funny, I'm glad I asked you that question though. I listen to, like I do the Unstarving Musicians podcast for a long time, and our friend Chris Ducker says maybe your people don't need that. But I always said, I told him, I didn't tell him this, but I'll tell you, I sound like I'm stoned or something. I'm like really mellow. I don't have this like high energy in my voice. And he said, maybe your listeners don't need that. But now I'm doing this business podcast, and I listen to it, and somehow it does sound a little different. And like a couple of episodes back, I did 2 in a row with our other friend, Philip Van Dusen.
Mm-hmm.
And after I listened to that, and actually after I listened to the last interview prior to this one with someone who's jumped into the app game in the salon world, who's actually a very good friend of mine, I thought, I sound like I'm starting over, and I think it's just because of the slight difference of topics and audience. But the funny thing is I I have them formatted very much the same. But I'm glad I asked you that, so it's something for me to think about.
Yeah, I think it's important to know the audience, right? And know what they're, like I was saying, what's going to resonate with them too, right? For me, I like the raw kind of, Ask Rezzz is not edited, right? Like I just press record and whatever comes out in the next 5 minutes comes out, right? Like unless it's like, the door slams or something like that. But, it's raw, it's conversational, it's me, right? And that's what I want. And I do have an editor, and I have an editor for the other podcast, the longer form podcast, Live in the Feast. And he does the editing, he does the levels, and it's funny too, because my voice sounds different on that, but it sounds more professional. It sounds, he's got the music in there and splicing things together, and it comes together very, very nicely. But that's good for that, and the people that are listening to that type of podcast. Whereas Ask Rezzz is more of, hey, you asked me a question, I'm just going to give you the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're not going to spend your whole day doing it. You're just going to put it down and publish it.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I understand. Yeah, and I'm not using an editor now, just kind of recent, and I thought I'm going to let these be a little more raw. I'm going to see if I can actually trim some time off of the whole process, because as you know, it's very time consuming to put these things together if you factor in everyone's time. So it's still, the jury's out. I think I'm starting to see some improvement there in terms of shaving time off, just learning little things here and there. I wanted to tell you, and I thought maybe it would be after we got done recording, but I signed up for one of your email sequences to sort of get a feel for what you're doing. I was very impressed with the content on the site, so I signed up for, I don't even remember where I got it either. You have a number of kind of opt-in things on the site, but it was one, I don't know if this is what it's called, but the first email is, are you ready to get your best clients? I'm like, well, this is cool. I've done some web design and had an ongoing project for a while, and I've been kind of toying with the idea of just making it more of a regular thing. There's certainly been times where I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this, but great job with it, I wanted to say. So I watched the first video, and I'm looking forward to watching the rest. So it's like an email course for those who are listening to help you learn how to get clients more easily and effectively. So really cool. It's good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yep.
So what is, if there is a single or a couple things you could say to WordPress designers or developers, freelancers, I suppose, in that world, what's your best high level advice for them?
Best high level I can say is always keep your focus in mind. And by focus, I mean, why did you get into what you got into in the first place? We can get into the weeds a lot and sometimes lose that focus. If it's just writing your why down on a Post-it note and putting it on the side of your monitor, then do that. Because that allows you to come back up for air and maybe not get upset at things that may get you upset. But it keeps things in perspective in that way. And that was helpful for me. And I tell people that all the time. If you just need to do that, have that compass, right? And make sure that that's where you're headed.
That's great advice. I frequently find myself wading in the quagmire for that.
Yeah, right.
The exact reason of not doing that. There was another thing I wanted to ask you about podcasting, and we'll wrap it up here. You chose to do In the Feast. That's the name of the long form one, right? In the Feast?
Live in the Feast.
Live in the Feast, sorry. You chose to do that in seasons. Mm-hmm. Has that worked out for you? I assume yes. And why did you choose to do it that way?
Yes, it's definitely worked out for me because for two things. I decided to do seasons so that I could have a number of episodes that over the entire season talked about a specific topic of freelancing. So first season was getting clients. The second season is marketing. The third season, which is wrapping up this very week at the time of this recording, was really origin stories of other freelancers. And season 4, which starts at the beginning of November, is going to be about niching down. And that makes it nice and neat for somebody that wants to learn that topic. Each episode is very in-depth, and you come away with action items on the end of each episode to be able to implement. And it allows for that break, that natural breath, right? Like, hey, look, we just did this race. And that's what I did for a long time for season 1 and 2 was I was recording the same week it was getting released. And really stressful.
I know, I can identify.
It's not the way to do it. But season 3 was great because I recorded everything all in advance. There was like maybe 3 or 4 episodes on the back end of the season that weren't recorded at the time episode 1 came out. So it was like, hey, look at this. This is awesome. This is the way it's supposed to be done, right? But it allowed for that break, so to speak, between each season to, all right, well, that we talked about that topic at length. Now let's talk about something different. Let's frame that in a different light. And it helps the listener to, hey, look, maybe this set of 10 episodes is not for me. Maybe I don't need this, but I like the episodes and I like the podcast, and I'll come back to see what the next one's about. And this business world is always ever changing, and who knows how long Live in the Feast will actually last, or Ask Rezzz for that matter, right? Like you said, your other podcast, right? This one's totally different. So who knows where that stuff may evolve. But if Live in the Feast is seasons, that allows me to kind of define what that podcast is for that select group of episodes, and doesn't mean that I can't go back and change it and add another episode in here and there, which I haven't done yet, but I might do it for season 2, actually, with one of the episodes that I recorded. But it's a nice little package, and people can binge watch that entire season. I mean, look, TV shows have been doing it for years, right? So they're not wrong in what they're doing. So maybe this is a way that works for podcasts, and it works for me. I like the idea of seasons. It gives me that break.
Yeah, I decided to do this podcast in seasons just so I could have a break, but I love the thematic nature of the way you've set yours up, and I may have to steal that for moving forward, starting with the second season. I think that's a really great idea. So, Jason, thank you so much for spending time with me. I know that people can find you at Rezz.com. That's REZZZ, 3 Z's. And they can find your podcast at Rezz.com/podcast. That's where they find Live in the Feast. And Ask Rezzz at Rezz.com/ask. Is there anywhere else they should look for you that they can't just find right there?
Yeah, I mean, I call Twitter my home away from home. Rezz on Twitter with 3 Z's as well. And that's usually the best way to get a hold of me on the socials. Nice.
Well, hey, this has been great. I hope we can do it again sometime soon. And I know I'll see you around since we're both members of the Upreneur community. So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it, bud.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard today, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you have a couple of extra minutes, please leave a review. It helps this podcast, and more importantly, it'll help other small businesses and entrepreneurs find the podcast so that they too can learn from the trial and error, the expertise, the insights of successful business owners like you. Are you struggling to get the word out about your business? Struggling to get in front of the right prospects at the right time? Head over to partnerforleads.blog to join our community. As a member, you'll get an occasional email from me with tips, hacks, stuff I'm learning from guests of this podcast. This is all stuff you can use to grow your business. It's free, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Ciao for now.